Welcome to another episode of Tell Me More. In this episode, Dr. Wiles, Katy, and myself have a great conversation closing out this sermon series on character and virtue, and we're looking ahead to meaning and purpose, and we hope that it's a great conversation for you.
Welcome to this episode of Tell Me More. We're in the studio. It's late May, and it's all of us.
It is.
However, it is not Monday.
It is not. Well, Monday was Memorial Day.
Monday was Memorial Day. Dr. Wiles gave us the day off. Thanks,
That's right.
boss.
You're welcome.
And so,
Personnel committee.
Yeah. So we're, our mind is turned toward camp. There's a lot going on around the church, and we're pretty excited to be in here today to recap not just Sunday, but really you've ended a series, and there's just a lot to talk about. So I wanted to ask about Ascent.
Yeah,
I know that's not quite the sermon, but
Chris Backer was here.
Yes.
What's his official title with Ascent?
Well, he has a new title.
Okay.
We're now calling him the General Director of Ascent, of the
General
Ascent
Director.
movement. Mm-hmm.
Okay.
That's important.
The executive director technically is Wayne Faison. Wayne is the executive director of the Baptist General Association of Virginia,
Who we have a
BGAV.
high level of
do.
affinity with Virginia Baptist.
We do. And Wayne and I have been, Wayne came to our second meeting of organizational meeting for Ascent. The first meeting was in June of 2016. That was the first time we met, and there were just a handful of us there. Wayne
wasn't
came.
even named Ascent yet.
No, we
was
had
it?
no name for it. In fact, for the longest time, we called it the Congregational Mission Society. That
For a
was
minute, I think
that was
Society-
its name.
Society for Gospel Awakening was a part of that.
It eventually got known as Society for Gospel Awakening because people didn't like the other title. Wayne and I wrote the original. He and I both wrote the original white papers for this whole thing. So he was at the second meeting. At that time, he was not the executive director of the BGAV yet. John Upton was. And so, but that was, what is this, 2025? That was now, how many years ago?
9 years ago.
Oh, my
9.
goodness. That's
We're doing
crazy.
the
It's
math.
been 9 years. So I met Chris, I think it was in 2017 in Atlanta at one of our, I think it was like our second meeting maybe. And might have been 2016 actually. And got to know him at that time. He was the head of Fresh Expressions and also the Ecclesia Network. It's church plant. Both of them are church planting networks. And he was also on staff for Virginia Baptist, the BGAV as they call it. And
Fresh Expressions was under their umbrella. It may still
was.
be.
was.
It is.
Fresh Expressions North America, I should say.
yes,
Yeah.
the one that was started here in the U.S.
Yeah. For those, we're using a lot of insider language. So Fresh Expressions, it is a church, excuse me, like kind of a church planting movement in post-Christendom. So how do churches create communities of faith? Fresh Expressions of Church is what they're calling them in a post-Christian setting where people aren't necessarily going to come to church, but perhaps you could go to them, turn a hobby into a Bible study, into a church. It's really healthy. It's like healthy church planting. Once I read their material, it's like, oh, this is like healthy church planting. But in the context of post-Christendom. And so it started in England, and now it's in a lot of the Western world.
Yes.
And Chris, I don't know if started, but Gannon
did.
Stems was part of that too.
Yeah, Chris was working for the BGAV and got interested in Fresh Expressions movement, went to England and actually was trained there and then brought it back to the U.S. and then became the director of it in the U.S. And he has, when he left Fresh Expressions to come to join Ascent officially, there's I think they're up to like 500 church planters that are a part of the Fresh Expressions network now that Chris oversaw.
My close encounters with it are through Gannon and Carrie Sims, who are now Gannon's pastor of Cliff Temple Baptist Church in Oak Cliff. If y'all know Cliff Temple, he's moved from Virginia 3 years ago, but we knew him through some uptick stuff I was doing. And anyway,
He's Baylor. He was president of the student body at Baylor.
and then did Duke. Got a wife along the way, Carrie, who's quite competent. I spent last week with Carrie at an Ascent thing. We could talk about that if we want to. But these are really innovative, Christian, moderate. There are kind of Christian.
Centrist Orthodox.
Thank you. What I used to call moderate, but we like centrist Orthodox now.
We do.
They are centrist Orthodox Christians with a very innovative spirit, which is I like.
Good people.
It's a challenge for me because I'm not the most innovative. So they are good people. Anyway, so Chris, you met him
Chris
along
is-
the way.
Chris is now called the general director, which means he's just the leader of Ascent.
Right.
Right.
And we have a leadership council. We've changed the name of it about 10 times as well.
What is it now? Steering? Is that the word?
We're calling it now the leadership council.
Okay.
And I'm the chair of it, and Cindy is on it. Jim Bauckham, who's the pastor of Columbia Baptist in Falls Church, Virginia,
Also
is
a
the
great guy.
vice chair. So you've got Texas Baptists and Virginia Baptists are kind of leading it. This was Baptist born, but it has now spread to numerous denominations, and we have different denominations reflected on the council, and we're connected to a number of Wesleyan groups of all types, Church of God, Anglican, Independent.
Vineyard, I learned about that. I didn't know much about vineyard churches.
So there's a pretty broad, what's happened is there's just a group of folks in this centrist Orthodox space who have somewhat lost their missional home in North America. And so it has led to lots of conversations about how you can cultivate a home without starting a new denomination. And so that's what we've done. And it's really a cool thing. It's the kind of thing where we've built synergistic relationships. And so we've asked people to join, to bring everything they have to the table, and then let's share what we all have so we don't have to reinvent everything. So we've got seminaries that have joined. Truett Seminary is one of those. Northern Seminary, where Luke is doing his D-Min, has joined. Weinbrenner, Church of God Seminary out of Ohio, they're a part of our movement. Their president is on our council. That's part of the Church of God General Conference, which is headquartered in Ohio. Numerous American Baptist adjudicatories have joined us, regional bodies, in other words.
Yeah,
of
they govern
American
themselves
Baptists.
regionally. They have a little bit more hierarchy than we do.
They do. A little more connectionalism, but more freedom with their relationships with their national bodies, if you will.
Yes.
So they have autonomy. And so, like the American Baptists of Michigan or the American Baptists of the Northwest, groups like that have joined. But then here in Texas, what we used to call Texas Baptist Men is now called Texans on Mission. That group has joined. Restore Hope has joined.
Several Canadian Baptist groups.
Right. You had the Canadian Baptist Mission, the Baptist Union.
The French Baptist Union of Canada. I
So-
think the Evangelical Alliance of Quebec has joined.
Cuba's in. We got Cubans.
Yes, we
on
have
the
a
boat.
group
On the boat.
of church leaders from Cuba. So it really is a North American movement. And it's giving us an opportunity to have first of all, to have relationship with like-minded centrist Orthodox Christians. We've adopted the Cape Town Commitment of Lausanne to kind of guide us as our theological statement. And it's just fun. What you just said, Katie, it's a lot of creative, innovative people.
Yeah, it's good.
What I love about it is
cross-section.
nobody's mad. It's not a movement that was started in anger. It was a movement started really with hunger and a desire to be a part of something beyond what we are experiencing here in our own state. Because most of us who are in this movement have really good relationships across our state. We've just lost them nationally and some of them internationally. And so this movement has really begun to gain momentum, and it's starting to multiply. There are more and more and more and more folks literally every week expressing interest in joining. And so Chris Backert, he's been here at Arlington. We had a meeting several years ago of our leadership council, but we just weren't formed yet, and so we didn't have the momentum we have now. So this is Chris's first time to be at our church after being named the leader of Ascent. And so we had him meet with some folks from our Great Commission Council. Cindy brought staff members from Restore Hope. She brought board members from Restore Hope to give them a chance to meet Chris. We also had Julio Guarneri here, and his wife Monica. Julio is our executive director for Texas Baptists, and he's friendly toward this movement. And so, yeah, there's just a whole lot happening in that space right now, and it's really exciting. And there are pieces of it that y'all are all involved in. So Ashley is involved in the missional component along with Cindy, and Katie, you and Ashley have gotten involved in the Junia movement, these high capacity
Women in leadership,
and Luke,
We
you've
just had our
gotten
first
involved.
retreat last week.
Yeah, Luke's been involved
Which is
with
why y'all were
young adults.
Podcasting without me.
Yeah, that's right. You were in Wisconsin? No,
I was in Wisconsin.
Minnesota?
Yeah, no, Wisconsin. Rural Wisconsin.
And but Luke has been a part of we had a task force looking at young adults. But now Luke is in on we
I don't know what to call it.
well, it's a desire to build some practical pathways for churches and individuals and denominations to get involved practically in what we're doing. And so we have recognized Canada as one of the most unreached places in the West. And so we're partnering with this French Baptist Union in Montreal And so Luke has become the leader for the Ascent connection to that particular part of the world. And so, so we've got, and Brad Eccles on our staff has gotten involved because another practical pathway that Ascent is building is helping churches develop ministry to families during the week through weekday education. And because during COVID, a lot of churches closed down their child development centers and their entire weekday programs for a lot of reasons, but it's left a lot of people in many communities across the U.S. In positions where they don't have a safe place to take their children.
Childcare is like one of the number one needs. If you ask young families what they need, and it's trusted childcare.
So Ascent has developed a network of churches that are doing that well, and we're becoming a mentoring entity to help churches learn how to begin that kind of ministry in their own churches. And so Zoe Greiner and who leads our CDC, and Brad, who is her supervisor, are part of that vital church network, if you will. And so,
great stuff.
So yeah, there's just so many ways we're now connected to Ascent, and it's really exciting. And so it gave us a chance to hang out with Chris some. He had his whole family with him, but his family's on vacation. Chris is on a tour of the U.S., and he is cultivating relationships on behalf of Ascent, and he's building bridges to new entities. And so they're in Utah right now. They've driven to Utah. They'll be driving to Seattle.
Okay.
And coming from Utah, coming across to Montana. They will eventually find their way up to Canada, and then eventually he lives in Pennsylvania. So they will have encircled the U.S. By car. And so he gave his family a break Sunday. They were at Six Flags while he was here with us.
I didn't see a family. Well, for a second, I was at this thing last week. Like you said, one of the first, really one of the most established things, there's a better word than things, but that Ascent is doing is this network and cohort for high capacity women in leadership. Kind of the tagline is like women leading in spaces that are predominantly male, which is a unique role, and we can talk more about that. But I was there last week in Wisconsin. It's a cohort, meets in person to kick it off. We'll meet online for a year, and then we'll meet again in Waco at Truett in next May. And so there are 30 of us, or 28, somewhere in there. Carrie Sims at Cliff Temple is the organizer of it. Chris has kind of asked her to lead it. And there were women from all the places we just talked about. The national director of Fresh Expressions was there. A woman pastoring in Montana. That's why I'm kind of recapping this. Cuban, Adria from Cuba, who is leading a church, and her husband is leading just an incredible movement out of the Methodist tradition in Cuba. But we had our friends in Alaska from Mark Goodman's church. Y'all know Mark. Some of y'all know Mark because he grew up here. So Mark Goodman, pastoring Rabbit Creek Church, Baptist Church in Alaska, who just kind of, I say randomly, but they just got kicked out of the SBC. I say randomly because why are you picking on this church in Alaska? There's my honest opinion. It's doing really good gospel work around the world. If you don't want to be partners with them, then I do. So
because they've joined Ascent.
So two of their pastors, and I think they've joined the BGCT.
They have joined Texas Baptist.
So if that gives a little credit, then I'll let y'all have that. But they were there. So you've got Cuba to Alaska. We didn't have a lot of the Canadian Baptists, although they were invited. They're to be honest, they're very busy, and so this is a commitment, and I appreciate that because I personally want people who do this to be committed to it. But I don't even know how many traditions were in the room, at least 5. I'd say that Baptist was very well represented. But you had the woman leading the Vital Preschools Initiative was there, who Brad's become friends with. So Ashley had a ball, I had a ball, but we felt like the kids at the big kids table. I mean, we felt like we should keep our mouths shut and just learn, which is a fun space for us to be in. So I think, Ascent is more than just the best people we know getting together, but it is the best people we know getting together. But tangibly, I think there's a lot that's about to sprout that people can be a part of. And
I love it.
And tangibly, because I think our church is ready to tangibly take hold of something, which is why I think it's good to talk about it. Fun that we get to play in those arenas, but also it's like, what is this for me? And I think that's a little bit of like, things are sprouting that, there are trips you're about to be invited to. There's already fruit.
We're going to take a volunteer mission team from our church to Montreal in September. Yeah. If you want to know more, reach out to me. We'd love to take you.
Yes. So there's a lot brewing.
Yeah,
and
it's really good.
It's really exciting. So, okay, I didn't mean to give that long, but
here we are. Okay, let's talk about the sermon
here.
Really, the sermon from Sunday.
Yeah.
This, in
Feels like a
full
long-
disclosure, this is Wednesday. So
Yeah, I know. I've lived a lot of life since Sunday morning.
I did
I'm
rewatch.
already writing the one for next Sunday, but I can talk about the one from last
We can
Sunday.
any day, just in my life, any full day without daycare. Mm-hmm. One, very grateful for our daycare. Mm-hmm. Any full day without daycare is pretty much a memory erase because all it is for me
It's filled with triplets.
it's a full day with 2.5-year-old, 2.5-year-olds, which I don't know the last time you hung out with 3 2.5-year-olds at once, but it's all you do, and it's a slog. And then when they go to bed, you think, I am dumber for the doing. so I don't know what we did Sunday, but I got some notes, so hopefully they'll refresh my memory. I do know that we closed out Meaning and Purpose.
Nope.
Oh, we're about to open Meaning
Character
and Purpose.
and Virtue.
Like I
Character
said,
and Virtue.
we closed out Character and Virtue,
And we're starting Meaning and Purpose.
and we were
Sunday.
and we did a lot of Colossians. So I don't want to miss anything from that. So I would like to just look at all of that, and then we can do any specifics as well.
Do you have any kind of closing thoughts on this sermon series before we launch into summer?
Well, yeah, I think just when you think about flourishing, Udo, how did Aristotle refer to eudaimonia? He
I don't have an answer to that question.
He tended to see it
Let me think.
so behaviorally guided that that's how you demonstrated virtue. It was through virtuous living.
Yeah, virtue and Aristotelian ethics is like a skill you can practice, like learning the violin.
Exactly, right. And
So-
if enough of us do it, you'll be better off, I'll be better off. But he rarely had anything to say about how that grew out of the formation of your internal character. He was more behavioral in his approach to things. Whereas the gospel starts on the inside, and then that virtuous life is reflected on the outside.
Yeah.
And they're so deeply connected and dynamically related. And so the virtue ethics of the New Testament is more, in my opinion, more internally focused with the expression externally.
So if I may, if you were just Aristotle living in Greek society, it wasn't Greco-Roman at that point, he was just Greek. You could be a virtuous person by Aristotle's mark, but, if you had a slave that ran away, you could be a fully virtuous person and have that slave killed.
Of course.
Whereas if you come to the New Testament, and here's where Colossians is pertinent. Philemon and Colossians are tied together. We've talked about this. You talked about it on Sunday. If you have a slave that runs away and you have a slave owner who's a follower of Jesus and the slave has become a follower of Jesus, Paul says, you guys are brothers in Christ.
Everything has changed.
Everything has changed. And so Aristotle, you can be virtuous, kill your runaway slave. New Testament
or
gospel
women.
living. Or women. New Testament living. Hey, this slave is your brother. Everything has changed. The social order has changed. What you thought was virtue
Yeah.
ain't even close.
Right. And I think that to me was the heart of the sermon series, tying it to the development of character, that this internal transformation that takes place as a believer because of the power of the gospel.
I taught if there was a sermon sandwich between 8:30 and 11, I taught a 9:45 Bible study. I'm filling in for Cindy Dake's class. As we all know, Cindy Dake's going through a cancer journey. She actually just texted me, a good update, I think. And they're going through the Sermon on the Mount, which ties in so well with this because particularly I taught the kind of the end of 5 where Jesus talks about what I think is a key verse to Matthew, but Dr. Wiles disagrees, about I didn't come to abolish the law, but to fulfill it. And then he talks about divorce.
disagree.
I'm just messing. We disagree on what the key passage is. That's Wednesday Bible study. You can go look that up on YouTube. But anyway, but I was talking to them because it's about divorce and it's about murder and it's about, lust. So he's saying, you've heard that you shouldn't do these things, but I'm actually telling you can't even think them. Like it's about the internal character. It's not just behavior, but it's actually the transformation of your heart, which I think fits really well with what you're trying to say. And in fact, don't worry, I referenced you. Like, this character, maybe they picked the Sermon on the Mount because they're paying attention, but the character and virtue is really tied to what Jesus is trying to get at, I think, that internal transformation.
And what I love about what's happening with this global flourishing study, I actually spoke to our men's Bible study last night. They asked me to do an introduction to flourishing because that's what they're studying this entire semester this year, the men are. And what's somewhat groundbreaking in this global flourishing study from Tyler Vanderweel and Byron Johnson at Baylor, Vanderweel has spent his career in the public health arena. He's an epidemiologist. at Harvard, and he is the one who started the Human Flourishing Program at Harvard. But Vanderwill's expertise is in epidemiology, and historically in the public health sector, those kinds of folks have given most of their attention to disease and the eradication of disease. That's usually where they live. That's where all their research is focused. And Vanderwill is one of those men that is heavily influential in public policy regarding public health because, his pretty prestigious position at Harvard as a tenured faculty member there. Well, he decided that he wanted to study healthy people and turn his attention to what does it look like for a person to actually be a productive, we would say fruitful person. And so that's what's interesting about this study. They're spending, these 5 years focusing on what does it really mean to see people flourish? What helps them flourish? How do they self-identify as flourishing? What are the factors that lead them to flourish? And so that's where they've isolated these what they call domains, to where they can ask people deep questions about these various domains in their lives and try to come to an understanding of why. So if you say, for example, one of the domains is character and virtue. And if you're asked, they ask you a couple of questions on the original survey from the Flourishing Survey from Harvard. And then as you rate yourself on a scale of 1 to 10, if let's say you give yourself in that area, there's 6 domains. So on that one, let's say you give yourself an 8. Okay, well, these researchers are like, okay, so if you see yourself as a person who has really good character and you're a virtuous person, well, then there's in the research project, there's like 40 questions that follow trying to figure out why have you developed this character? Why is this virtuous life so important to you? Because it's contributing to your overall health as a person. So it's kind of a landmark study because for the first time, it's actually focusing on healthy people and why they are healthy and why they think they're healthy. And so I just love the fact that they've included character in that conversation, not just virtue. They put them both together because Tyler is trying to determine, is it really true that virtue grows out of that inner character? Can you actually document that scientifically? And is there a causative relationship between the two, not just a correlative relationship, which is really the heart of this study. They're looking for causation, not just things that live together in the same space. Like, for example, if you say somebody goes in the hospital and they have a prayer network and there are people praying for them and they tend to navigate that experience a little bit better than someone who goes in as an isolated adult who really has no kind of network around them. Well, it's hard to say that the prayer network and that support they've gotten is causative because it could be that this person's just a healthier person or maybe they're just in a better hospital.
Could be anecdotal.
Yeah, there are just so many other things.
Yeah, there's so many factors.
Yes. So what Tyler and them are trying to do is narrow things down to where they can actually look at things from more of a causation point of view, which is that's a groundbreaking thing. And so that's one of the reasons I'm excited about it. And it's not necessarily that I'm thinking that I'm banking on it, everything that I believe on it. I'm just interested in the fact that for the first time, a true, serious scientific study is being done to try to figure out why do these people seem to be flourishing in multiple societies with all kinds of different cultural settings. There's something, in other words, that connects us all as human beings, regardless of our setting. And that's what's fascinating to me about it. So that's what I was telling these men last night, that's why I got really interested in this. What led to it was, the question that before I headed for sabbatical last year, I didn't out you last night, Katy, in the conversation with these men, but I can do it I'll do it today.
You're the men's Bible study last night?
Yeah, I just said, one of my staff members said, how long are you going to pastor this church, and what do you wish we knew? And before I left to go on sabbatical last year, that was something that Katy asked me, and I said, well, I don't know the answer to the first question. Okay, I don't know. Second question, though, what do I wish everybody knew? What do I wish for my people? Well, that was a very thought-provoking question for me And so I found myself when I headed off on sabbatical last year, I usually start off with just a blank piece of paper. I won't this year because I'm too deep in. I've got pulled way too deeply into where we are right now.
We don't want you to start blank.
Right.
I mean, right now,
There's
you've
no
declared
need to,
3
yeah.
years. Yeah.
So,
that would be very disappointing if you came back with a totally new plan.
Right. So last year,
the MLT would revolt.
I did what I normally do. I'm just sitting with a blank piece of paper and I'm asking that question. So what is it I really want them to know? And what do I want them to experience? So I found myself writing things like fruitful and productive and seasonally appropriate, those kind of images.
Because we had also asked you about, like, we love the Psalm 1 imagery, but that for an increasingly biblically illiterate culture and church, sadly, how does that translate to people who don't know what Psalm 1 is?
That's right.
Like, what are the character qualities? So those are similar.
And my original pushback to Katy was, well, then read Psalm 1.
Can I also push back on Katy? We don't want to imply that we're not teaching Sunday school well.
No, but the people who come to our church are increasingly biblically illiterate.
People who are new to our church are not just people who came from a Baptist church looking for the next Baptist church. We're just finding more people who have no church Bible background whatsoever. Yes. We are so glad they're here.
Yes, of course.
But I would also say, and I hate it, there are people who've been here a while and don't know the Bible like we want them to. We're working on it. Yeah. I hate it.
And that's actually true everywhere.
Yeah, it's just true.
It is.
Yeah.
So I found myself writing those words. Well, the next thing you know, I just started researching the scripture. And I said, okay, I'm going, because this is really what I'm after, is for people to be productive, to be fruitful. And I see it as seasonally appropriate because I think there's something to that because the scripture to me paints it that way. There are seasons of pruning, there are seasons of planting, there are seasons of waiting, harvesting, all that imagery is connected in the scripture. Well, when I opened my Bible, the very first page, page 1, the original command from God to humanity, be fruitful. That's the first thing out of God's mouth to human beings. Now I realize he says, and multiply, okay, but the whole idea of fruitfulness is just woven into the fabric of who human beings are supposed to be, what we're supposed to experience. Well, that led me all through the Old Testament, all the imagery in the Old Testament of Israel as a vine, God is a gardener. Psalm 80, God has taken Israel, the psalmist said, and you've plucked this vine out of Egypt, planted it into this special land, and now look at it. It has grown. And Isaiah, plant the seeds of righteousness and grow the fruit of righteousness. I mean, that's just woven all the way through the Old Testament. So I'm just following that through. So I'm just writing page after page, of Scripture. Get to the New Testament, and Jesus says things like, okay, no, Israel's not the vine. I'm actually the vine, which is kind of lost on us because we don't have that in our theology, so to speak, but Jesus was speaking something incredibly powerful and prophetic.
Don't miss it.
So I'm now the vine and you're the branches, and but you've got to stay connected to me and you can bear fruit. And if you want to prove yourself as a disciple, it's John 15:8. It's to my Father's glory that you bear much fruit. And, Paul says in Colossians 1, we're talking about Colossians this season, Paul says the gospel, it's bearing fruit all over the world. And so I'm just writing all that down. And so next thing you know, I'm developing a plan over the next 3 years. Here's kind of what I would like to do to help explain all of that in a fresh new way to the church. And, I told the men last night, I don't use the word flourishing. It's just not... If you've been at our church for the last 3 months, you think that's the only word I know.
But start 18 months ago.
Yes, yeah. It's just not a word I used, and which is a little shocking to people because growing up in Alabama, we have the largest vocabulary base in the U.S. Obviously.
You called it the seat of
intelligentsia. Yeah, of course.
Yeah, I thought I heard that. Mm-hmm.
And but it's just not a word, and for some reason, I'm laying out 3 years. And one day I'm in my study just praying over it all, and I'm just writing out different words that I feel like kind of express what I'm trying to describe. And I write the word flourishing. And to me, it was random. Now, I believe it was Spirit-led because I'd been praying, asking God for wisdom. Well, I was on the board at Baylor, on the Board of Regents, when Baylor and Harvard entered into this agreement. But to be honest with you, I hadn't thought much about it. It was back in 2021, and it was going to be a while before it could be launched because they had to get all the funding organized, and it's $44 million. So this wasn't like a,
I'm going to split this bill.
Yeah, it's not like we're renovating the bathrooms in Coconut or whatever.
That's right. That's not what was happening here. And you're sharing it with Harvard, and Gallup. So you have these two giant research entities. And so I just Googled the word. Actually, what I Googled was human flourishing. And the very first thing that popped up was this article about Baylor. And when I saw that, I thought, oh, yeah, I remember that, because I remember Byron Johnson bringing that to the board. I remember us talking about, entering into this grant. And I thought, I wonder what happened with that. So then next thing I start reading about it, and I read a little bit more about it. And so then I just I know Byron, so I'm going to email Byron. He's a great guy from my time on the board. Byron and I have a connection. Byron does he does a lot of research in Rome. So he and I have written back and forth about that, talked about it. Anyway, so I just emailed Byron. I said, hey, man, I'm in the middle of this 3-year plan. And I kind of shared him a little bit about it, this whole idea of, fruitfulness and all of that. And now I'm looking at this wondering, is there any kind of connection between what you guys are doing and what I'm feeling to lead my church in? Well, it wasn't, but I don't remember how many minutes, but it was within, an hour or two, Byron writes me back and says, Dennis, you need to see what we're doing. We need to know what you're doing. And y'all at that time, I had no idea. It had never crossed my mind that there was something like this going on that we would get connected to. I was more interested, like I said, in trying to figure this out biblically, what I wanted to share with the church over 3 years, and maybe even up to 5 years, because I think it's going to take a while for me to unpack all this the way I want it to be unpacked. And I say that, it sounds provincial, but I am the pastor of the church, so kind of how I'd like to see it play out. Next thing you know, he sends me this material written by this researcher from Harvard on Flourishing and the Church. It's the title of the booklet. And I'm like, I've never heard of it. And I didn't know that it existed. And I'm like, you've got to be kidding me. So I write him back immediately. And then he writes me back and says, you got to get to know Kate Long. You got to get to know Scott Hare. He starts introducing me to all these people. And the next thing you know, it's a thing now.
Here we are about to launch a pilot program.
Exactly. Now we're part of a pilot church program. Yeah. But it's all connected to this whole idea of meaning and purpose as a human being, character and virtue, finding ways to live a healthy way in any season of your life. It's not that it means that everything is perfect. That's not it. You can flourish in any season. One of the examples of it to me is in the Chosen. Mayor Ross, our mayor in Arlington, his son is an actor, and he has cerebral palsy. And so when you see him, you won't know that that's what he has, but if you're with him a little while, it's obvious there is something physically wrong with him. He's a little smaller in stature, has kind of an interesting gait when he walks, so you can kind of tell. And what it is he had a mild case of, I say mild,
life-changing,
but not completely debilitating case of cerebral palsy at birth. So there's always been controversy about James the Less, the disciple. What does that mean? Is he shorter than James? Is he younger than James?
Is it stature?
Is he less prominent than James? I mean, why is he called James? What an interesting name for a disciple, James the Less, but nevertheless.
The good part is you get named to the Bible.
Yes,
the bad part is,
James the
Less.
What a nickname.
Yeah, it's kind of like Andrew. Andrew always is listed as Simon Peter's brother. You rarely get just Andrew.
Yeah, once again.
So I'm a little brother, so I get that.
Yeah, I know.
I've been Emerson's little brother my whole life. It's all good. So, so he's obviously physically challenged. So there's this scene in The Chosen where Jesus assembles the disciples, Luke 10, and says, now go out into all these towns and villages 2 by 2, heal the sick, cast out the demons, all this kind of stuff. So in the scene in The Chosen, obviously not in the scripture, but in The Chosen, so Dallas Jenkins has cast Mayor Ross's son as James the Less. He's shorter, he's smaller, and he has a physical challenge. So that's Dallas Jenkins' take on the Less, if that makes sense.
He's made an opinion there. Yeah.
So there's this powerful scene in The Chosen where he corners Jesus in this little alleyway, and he says, so you're sending us out to go heal people? And Jesus says, yes. And he says, well, Master, why don't you heal me? And I love this scene because Jesus puts his hands on his shoulders and he says, I have healed you, James. And there's this look like, in other words, your healing is so much deeper than just what's happened to you physically. Go share that. I love that. The idea that you can flourish even though everything is not just perfect in your life. you know? And it's a deeper understanding of human flourishing from a Christian perspective that I think informs what we will learn from the flourishing study.
All these domains and the scores that go with the domains. I think the more I sit with it, which we've all been sitting with it, it's more about your relationship to those things than it is an actual, you know.
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, that's my sense. Like, especially with physical health, mental, like you can. And Byron even talked about, maybe Scott, when we talked to them about it, trying to understand it ourselves, it was like someone can have a bipolar disorder and have a 10 on mental health because it's under, they've mastered it, but their relationship with it is at a place of peace.
Yes.
And they have not conquered it.
Right.
You can live with something and still have a very high score. Like your relationship with your financial health, if you're a billionaire, can be a 2 because it's ruling you.
That's right.
Or
the rich young ruler.
Yeah. Or you can be a little bit poor, but have a 10 because you just have a right relationship with it. So I think it's a lot about our posture, our relationship with things, not a material sense of like what you might, an American eye, might view as.
Right. Which brings to me this study we've just been through at our church. You bring Romans 12 into this. Well, when your mind is starting to be renewed, well, then you actually start seeing things very differently, you know, and that's the part of the transforming work of the gospel. And so, and then you bring Colossians 3 in, which is really one of the greatest passages in the Bible on virtuous living. You know, don't live this way, take these things off, live like this. But love is the greatest thing there is. But you got to do this together. All these virtuous qualities, rather, they're all relational. They're lived out in community. And so that was the point Sunday. So I tried to draw it all together. That the core is love, but the command is you've got to take some of this stuff off, put some of these things on, and then you do that in community. So that's the beauty of the church. But as I said Sunday morning, you don't have to do it. So you don't have to be the church. You don't have to live like this. But if you want to be a church, if you want to be this outpost for the kingdom of God, if you want to be this representation of inaugurated eschatology, this age to come reality, well then you do have to live like this. So it builds accountability into the community. So I love this whole conversation about character and virtue because I think it's so deeply connected to what the gospel's about to begin with, and it's so much deeper and more holistic than Aristotle. Because I think Aristotle's brilliant. We're still talking about.
We're not debating that.
Yeah, but it was just not enough. He never addressed the core problem. Because he just never saw it. Like you said, Luke, he would say, well, a slave is a slave. I mean, they were born a slave. Obviously, the fates have, it is what, they can't undo it.
Be born a woman.
And I'm sorry, Katy, you're born a woman. Okay, guess what? That means I can abuse you. I can treat you however I want to. And you just need to get over it because you had nothing to do with it. It's really not on you. I can't help that I was born a man. It is what it is. Okay, and so
this whole conversation should make Jesus look pretty good.
Yes. So you could almost argue that the Sermon on the Mount is filled with a whole new philosophy. I mean, it's obviously rooted in our messianic theology, of course, in our Christology. But Jesus was a philosopher to some level. I mean, he was speaking in a language that people would have understood philosophically, particularly the educated people of his day would have, because those are the kinds of conversations they had. Is it wrong to do this? Well, Aristotle said yes, okay? And Jesus will say, well, actually, it's not just wrong to do this. Let me tell you what else is wrong. It's wrong to even have the thoughts that lead to that. So Jesus will take everything and elevate it to a whole nother level, which then requires the inner transformation if you're going to ever have any success at this. So it's just all woven together for me. And so I'm trying this year, I'm doing 5 out of the 6 domains, and we'll eventually get to the other one next year. We'll revisit all of them all through this journey from different perspectives. But, this Sunday we're going to turn to meaning and purpose. And this whole idea of, well, why is anything meaningful? Why would we believe that we have a meaningful existence, and why do you need one?
I think you actually made me preach a sermon on why everything was meaningless.
Yes, that's exactly right.
Yeah, we did do some of Ecclesiastes,
didn't we?
Yeah, so, lest we forget. We got some weird text given to us.
Which is really a great text to use in this conversation.
It really is.
If you think about it, you could pull Ecclesiastes in.
Reemerge,
God.
Right.
Yes, so that's exactly right. So, but I'm going to start off this Sunday with the heavens declare the glory of God, the psalmist's theology that everything that is an expression of who God is. Well, if we believe that, well, that means everything's purposeful. Everything is meaningful. It's just infused with it because it's connected to a creator, And so it's not really the cosmological argument for God. That's not what I'm going to, I may mention that. But the point is, we are by faith, we believe in this God. And so therefore, we have understood that everything has a sense of purpose to it and meaning, including our lives. So we'll go from the heavens, we'll go to Psalm 8 after that. God has crowned us with glory. We are his crowning achievement. So, and I love the fact that we're living in an era where scientists now are exploring space at a rate they've never been able to do before, and they're fascinated with it because of the expanse of it.
It's amazing.
And they can't come to the end of it. And it is leaving them literally spellbound right now because they're saying, oh my goodness, this is so much more dense and massive than, guys like Einstein would be. I wish some of those guys were alive right now to see what's actually happening because it's so incredible, mind-bending really. And so we're living in an era where a lot of this is, to me, is being documented scientifically where people aren't quite sure what to do with it yet. So yeah, I'm looking forward to the summer.
Okay.
So we're closing the door on character and virtue.
Yeah.
It was good. We're opening the door on meaning and purpose.
Let's do it.
Cool.
Love it.
All right. Well, we'll see y'all next week. Thanks for listening to the Tell Me More podcast today. You can subscribe to this podcast on your app of choice, or you can visit us at fbca.org to find out more information about the podcast and our church. Thanks for listening. Have a good day.